Thank you for joining my presentation. It means a lot to me. And my friends Martin and Johannes are the ones who invited me. They told me that they are going to leave after half an hour for a photo session. 15 minutes. So if you leave before, I know what it means. And I actually wanted to say, if for some reason you find out this is not for you, it's totally okay for me that you go somewhere else. I mean, it's not fun to be a place which is not for you. And on the other hand, if you think it's amazing, then you can go and grab your friends in the middle of the presentation too. Never seen that. My name is Morten, and I'm going to talk to you about lead with strategy or leading with strategy. And I'm also going to paint a picture of the future organization. And if I had to explain everything that I had discovered myself, I mean, this would be a week show. So I'd actually try to do the other thing around to sort of step a little bit into where I see things going and talk about what that looks like. So that's an invitation for you to join that. And I think there's something really big at play. And if you're good at making tools, then this is like the next multi-billion-dollar opportunity in the market that nobody's really seeing it. I'm not so interested in this. I'm doing the operating model for it, and you can have that for free. But there's something really interesting going on, so help me explore that. This is what I had planned to talk about. I had planned to sort of yell and scream about how bad strategy is and how much the Scaled Agile framework got it wrong. But I think you know all about that. So let's instead try to light a candle. And I have planned a story for you. It will include what we are talking about. I mean, liquid operating model, coordination, orchestration, collaboration. I have something I call liquid agile, which is the idea of how you work in that environment. And I actually see it to be the next thing after what we talk about agile at scale. So when I use the word liquid, it's about amplifying human potential to flow with opportunity or freely be able to explore the opportunities you have. And then, of course, we will talk about strategy. And if you have some friends who are agile coaches and not working at the moment, I think that's the best hint for getting the next job or gig, is that there's something really unique going on around how we orchestrate work, the role of strategy, and who can and should work with that. So, I'd like you to meet these people. Is there someone you don't know? My guess is that you have never heard about reshuffle. Who has heard about reshuffle? So, Sandeep Paul Chaudhry won Thinkers 50 Strategy Award just a few days ago. And he's the first to explain really, really well why AI is a lot more than chasing efficiency at the work floor, and much more about orchestration, orchestration, the organization, the business model, and the ecosystem, which is what I will talk about. Stellar, who heard about Stellar? So Rethinking has predicted that we go towards something they call a zero-cost future, where we will have stellar technology. That's technology that includes labor, natural resources, and everything you need in it. So, for example, solar panels on the roof, Tesla in the driveway, running your washing machine, free energy, free transportation, free clean clothes, once you have made the investment. Gary Hamel has, for 30 years, together with his co-author, explained to us that bureaucracy always wins. And that's still true. And Dave Snowden, forgot to put his name there, but I guess you know those. He's the one who has really explained what does complexity mean for our reality, and made the point that most of the logic we use at work is an ordered world logic, but actually we would be better off assuming a higher influence of complexity. So, what does this mean? Well, actually what the Rethink X guys talk about is that there's a complete new era coming, and there's only been 2 prior eras. And you could say the first era was about the gather-hunter, I mean, living in the wild, chasing food every day. Then came industrialization. And now we talk about the post-industrial era or the stellar era. And first, I think you can say that was about automating work. We invented the machine. And what we are facing now, you can think of as automating management, underwriting, coordination. And what defines this new era? And now we talk about the organization. So what defines this new era is actually complexity and artificial intelligence. Probably no surprise to anyone. It's already here. And everything you need to do what I talk about is already here too. So let's have a look. What does it mean? Because we will have a capability for continuous planning. So you probably remember continuous integration. I think that's what all of us do here. It's actually defining how we work today. If some of you are as old as me, you remember back in the days where testing was a manual thing and it could take a year from a developer. Let go of the keyboard to the code was actually in production. But we find a way of dealing with that so you could actually test and deliver code in almost zero time. And we sort of tricked the customer to jump into the compiler. It's called test-driven development. So in that sense that you could wash the code with everything your client wanted or customer wanted and test immediately if that was true or not. Before that, we had something called inspections. Who heard about GILP-style inspections? It was a big thing back in the 90s. It was actually the most effective quality technique we had at the time because it helped people learn to not do defects. And just like that, today you actually have a capability for continuous planning. And as you know, the compiler comes with a lot of warnings. Some of those are errors, but some of those are false positives. In the same way, we today have the digital capability, access to unstructured data, almost infinite power to combine, and you can wash out all the false complexities. What is a false complexity? Well, it's something that you don't know that you could have known. So it can help you find gaps and overlaps in what you're doing. Now you might ask, what is this crazy old man talking about? Anyone sitting with that question?
I believe you're going somewhere.
Thank you. So let's have a look. And this is like super naive, so I hope you will forget me, but I think this is the simplest example I could think of. 3 friends organizing a dinner party. In Denmark, we normally say soup, meat, and ice cream, right? So classical dinner for the friends. They are chatting, maybe on Slack, who is doing what. One of the guys have a little bit too much milk, so he say, I'll bring all my milk. And the other one says, well, I'll be there 2 hours before with the meat. I know, fantastic place to buy meat. But then there's this 4th thing, listening as they chat and say, hey, I mean, we don't really need milk for what we are going to do. So you better leave that at home. We talked about doing this special Scandinavian thing called rubber steak that needs to boil 24 hours underground on the top of a dead fire. So, you know, we are not going to have meat sushi, so you have to cook that before you come here, etc. Somebody has an allergy, and actually one of their friends is planning his wedding on the same day that they are planning the dinner, so maybe they have to find another day. But you can easily imagine how sort of these helpful little nudges help them think better and maybe avoid some quite fatal mistakes. Does that make sense? Now imagine that you buy the biggest washing machine in the world and throw all your backlogs and all your plans and everything into it and just turn it on. Then it will come out with stuff like this. And the interesting thing is that when you talk about morals, ethics, etc., this is actually in the sphere of privacy. So it's not more complicated than whether your boss can read your email or not. And of course, that's a deep question, but it's not like the other questions we are dealing with at the moment. Oh, and of course, the point is that this is really the revolution. So just like you could turn cost and cycle time on code washing to 0, now we can actually turn finding problems with plans, planning cycle times into 0, and that effectively will cancel out what you know as the strategy execution gap. Because the strategy execution gap is that some guys, typically the guys with cigars, has planned one thing, and lazy people do other things, so there is a conflict there. But this type of system will help to cancel it out. So what does this organization look like? ChatGPT made this picture for me, but I kind of like it, so we keep it for a while. Of course, I gave it the words. But the system of work will really be about coordination, that's going to be largely automated, the management, orchestration, leadership part, what are we trying to do, and the collaboration. And some interesting observations is that we are probably looking at something where backlogs will always be empty. There will be no planning meetings. The work is the organization. And there is no room for politics. Well, of course there is, but it's not like we see at the moment. I'll come a little bit back to that. So if we just try to look at all of this in one big picture, and I know it's a bit messy, but there's nothing really missing here. So first of all, everything you need to do what I talk about is already there. There's a bit of a catch-22, meaning that this is not something generative AI can do for you, but you can't do it without it. And that little bit freaks people out, because a lot of people I talk with, they try to figure out how do we change our organization to fit this new reality. But actually you cannot do that. You have to transform yourself and then draw over what you need to make sense. This little system is not a complete organization. It's an operating model. It's like a lens you can use to look at yourself and see how useful you are working together. Strategy. Well, when we talk about orchestration and we talk about self-leading people, strategy is actually like a language for coordination. What are we trying to achieve? How are we trying to do it? So everybody has their own little piece that they have to figure out how it fits with the other guys. Self-coordination, self-leadership. Well, if you don't allow people to do self-coordination, you actually bring the ghost of Gary Hamel with you, the bureaucracy. And you simply have to let that be back where it doesn't even belong there. But if you drag it with you, his law is that it will always win. So you have to find a free way to unmess yourself from that before you start doing the other things. So what does this look like? Well, this is actually a little bit repeating, so I'll just skip to the next one. So the best picture I have for how you do this, and it's taken a while, but it's the idea that it's the work that's the structure. So you can imagine that you have this big, messy pot that's your organization, and you take your hand and you put it into it, and you lift all the work out, and you shake it so nothing wrong follows, all the bureaucracy back in the pot, and then you lift it over and put it on a nice plate and stir it with your spoon. And if any of you joined Mike's presentation yesterday, he had this wonderful picture of bubbles and whatever fractal. So that's pretty much what it will look like. Sort of a structure of work which are usefully connecting and integrating in a fractal structure. So how do you actually do that? Well, I wrote about this some years ago without really realizing the magnitude of it. The book I wrote was sort of despair over not being able to make the safe LPM work, because there are some fundamental, I think, conceptual flaws in it. I mean, portfolio management is not about flow, it's about balance, things like that. But as part of that, I had to explain to a client at the time, how do you go about this? And that is not so difficult. So basically, you can think of yourself looking at this through the lens of Kinefin or a complex view and say, what would this orderly, safe LPM look like if you took it to a more complex world? So first you can, and I know you cannot read this, but first you can decompose what's going on. So there is like some fundamental strategy questions that comes up. The most important one is, can you even sleep at night? Then you can take those and put in to something I call balancing acts, things you do to stay on balance. Where are we going? Can our team even lift what we are set out to do? And are things in a balance on a regular basis? Then to the spaghetti thingy. If you think of your organization, all the silos, all the levels, and you look for where are people talking about work, where are they discussing plans, strategies, whatever. So there are little pieces of that conversation everywhere. So little meeting rooms with a few people who talk about what they talk about. But what do they also talk about? They talk about what all the other people are talking about. I mean, they are speculating. So if any of you have ever done a PI planning with the red thread and the yellow stickers, the dependencies, then it's almost like every endpoint of every little piece of string is sitting somewhere and wondering about what the other side is doing. So now imagine that you go around and you pick up all these little pieces of the conversation and collect them into one conversation. It's actually not unlike what some of you know as a big room planning or a PI planning. It's just without the planning. So you would meet on a regular cadence to check if things are really working out as you're expecting. Can you see this? I mean, one conversation instead of a lot of small conversations. And that's actually how you preserve human agency in an agentic world. I mean, we got to figure out what we want those digital monsters to do for us. And that requires real human conversation. And this is one of the forms how this can take place. So one conversation, which is actually the leading with strategy idea, and the balancing act, which will keep you on strategy. So, what are the real new jobs for strategy and the strategist? Well, if you look at typical strategy, so nobody has the same definition of strategy, but most people pretty much agree that this is it. You have like a North Star, you make some initiatives, and people who are doing real work also do the strategy work. It's called strategy initiatives, it's called strategy execution. So the North Star, cascaded, setting the direction. It's about predictability and flow. Am I in your way? Okay. And there are also some of those elements bottom up, which is called emergent strategy from Mintzberg. So top down, bottom up in these cadences. But it's time to change this, and this is actually driven by artificial intelligence and complexity, that when times compress and when you get a possibility to see better what you are not seeing using the digital washing machine I talked about, then you can actually use your strategy as a navigation tool. So rather than telling you where to go, it becomes a mirror for you to understand the situation. So it's more like a middle-out approach, navigational approach, integrative, generative, fractal, integrative because you check with the other people if what you do adds up, generative because you use it to generate new opportunity, and fractal because you can see the same patterns everywhere. And that's actually the idea of this liquidity, is that when you are organized just to the work and you can more easily reconfigure with new opportunity, that gives a new form of fluidity, which is not constrained by structure. So the difference between being flexible, which means bending structures, and liquid is an unconstrained possibility to shape with what you need to shape to, is the difference we talk about. So, about strategy. Who thinks strategy is boring? Thank you. It's actually one of the most misunderstood concepts in business. So people rarely agree what it is. But here are a few things that people normally agree with, is that it has to help us get things done. It has to be actionable. John Cutler calls this, there is like a choice space. There's something that you can operate within your sphere of influence. And it just has to be helpful and actionable for you to make the choices that you can make. And if you agree to it being actionable, there are actually some implications. It immediately becomes a reflection of you, a reflection of the time span you're in, and the context that you're operating in. And this is actually what gives it the fractality, because everybody has a strategy and everybody has a time and a room to operate in. Then, of course, it needs to be what really guides your choices, which means that, actually this one I want to take out. So it actually means that it has to be solving your biggest problems, and it has to represent some real choice. And that last one is something that Roger Martin often talks about in his play to win context, that most strategies actually don't solve the biggest problems, and most strategies don't represent a clear choice. We want to be the best in the world. The opposite doesn't really make sense. And probably not being the best in the world is not really your biggest problem. If it is, you're quite lucky. So in that sense also, strategy is something which is observable, testable, and changeable. So being actionable, being changeable are the very important characteristics. So what do strategies do? Well, they actually become instruments for navigation and a medium for integration and instrument for navigation. So it helps you navigate. It becomes language for alignment. It means it's what you discuss with the other people. It becomes a generator of opportunity. Maker of clarity. So clarity is not something you find, it's something you choose. You choose your truth, you can say. And only by doing so you can actually test if it really is like you think. Choices. And then, most importantly, when we have this spaghetti monster there on the table and there is no structure around it, what actually holds things together? And here you can talk about the idea of strategy as something that's a scaffold of your agency. It's basically what creates your shared direction. And it's also a test. And as I heard yesterday in the morning, in the future we will all be testers. So this is actually sort of how you engage with the world. It's a destructive test, which is a positive thing because you want your strategy to change the world, but it doesn't always change the way you want it. And then you need to go home and reflect. So what do strategies do? Well, everybody knows that, right? They tell us what to do and they figure out what the business model is. But this is actually changing. So strategy becomes much more collaborative, and with that there's also a new whole set of things that you need to do, which means that it really is sort of the glue in the organization when there is no other structure. And people like agile coaches or scrum masters, internal change people, are actually pretty good at having the role of helping us figure out what we are trying to do. So I see this as a future role for not sort of the sharp-nosed people who know where the North Star is and can force us all to go there, but actually the more reflective, facilitative people who can help us make sense of what is going on and figure out where to go next. So it's a shift from shaping to leading. And of course, it still has to be shaping, but the leading part is even more important. So a bit of a quiz time. I think I will help you answer these questions, but stop me if it's wrong. So is strategy simply a combination of aspiration and action, something that guides choice and is also guided by choice? Yes. Is it what you do and why you do it? Yes. So everybody has a strategy. You might not be aware of it, but if you observe yourself and your team over time, you would actually be able to get an idea of what it is and be able to express it. So it's an all-human collaboration. Is it what people do when you are not watching? Yes, because it's what people do. That's your strategy. Can be observed, tested, and changed? Yes. Highest level of planning and of coordination? This is quite interesting, because when you think of the whole regime of plans, like little plans, big plans, long-term plans, whatever, then the cherry at the top of whatever that looks like is actually the idea of strategy. That's the highest level of planning and coordination in any context, the fractality. And it's pretty hard to compensate for if it's not there. So what does all of this mean? Well, this is really fun, because we will see disruption like nothing we have seen so far. There are certain businesses that has never been disrupted. Big consulting, big banks, large bureaucratic organizations. Management has never been disrupted, okay? And it's not only sort of the transmission loss to the bureaucracy that Gary Hamel has been chasing, it's actually also unfair margins, unfair cost takeout, for example, in large-scale consulting. And a lot of people are now sort of telling that McKinsey is dead and my former employer, Accenture, is dead. And they might be right, but I don't think they have seen the reason right. So it's not because ChatGPT is smarter at doing what the young consultants are doing. It's actually because the price of risk is falling. Because when things get complex, it also gets more granular, and the risk gets lighter to carry. And when you hire 250 consultants to replace your SAP system or upgrade it, it's first of all because you don't have those people. They are busy doing other things, but it's also because it's a way of selling away the risk. I mean, you buy someone in who are supposed to know what they are doing. But that price is falling. And it's falling so much that in the future, companies will probably be able to carry that risk on their own shoulders and have much more flexible value chain constructions with smaller companies working with their own team in some sort of constellation, consortium type of thing. Which means that there is a complete new era for the medium-scale enterprise. And guess what? They will need agile coaches too, and they probably don't have those today. But they have to change like everybody else. But it's a fun thing to play with. And ChatGPT is not super good at doing topologies like this. If you doubt me, try to ask it to print out a map of Europe. It's great fun, because it looks like Europe, but it isn't Europe. So this is illustrative, and you can make it yourself. So there's a huge potential to significantly cut risks and cost. When you speak with senior leaders, there are three words they always talk about: speed, risk, and cost. Okay? Faster to market, less cost, less risk. And the speed I'm not so sure about, because one of the things that we didn't mention is that with almost infinite speed, I think you have to be a little bit careful about what innovations you bring to your customers, because they freak out if you innovate 200 times every day just because your agentic systems can do that. So actually, we have to find a way to slow down things a little bit. And I think you better wait with that conversation at home. Because probably at the moment everybody wants it to go faster. But the natural consequence of some of the things we see is that things will be too fast unless you dampen them a little bit and somehow find a way to pace things that you put to the market. And we already have this problem today. It's part of the change fatigue, meaning that there's too much new thing coming all the time. So we have to reduce that a little bit. But other than that, all the benefits are there. The problem is that it's a little bit trapped in how you're working at the moment. It's trapped in the organization. It's trapped in your business model. It's trapped in how you engage with your ecosystem. And that's what the book Reshuffle explains so well. I think it's the first book I have seen to really put words to this in a way that they resonate with our leaders. So, unless you change how you work, you cannot reap the full benefits. So you have to find a way to sort of let the spaghetti monster loose, is the best image I have, and have work guide how you do things. So coordination with AI, automation of management, organized to the real work. So the real work is what you do. And you see that pattern in a lot of the self-leading organizations. You see it in Denmark. We have a company called Clever that's very much in the media. And they have a purpose hierarchy. If you listen to Morningstar, they talk about the mission is the boss. So the problems that they are solving is how they see themselves organized. And you will see that pattern everywhere. In Agile, we have the same pattern because we work with the backlog. So that is the structure of work. That's now organized to the teams. But if you imagine that we took the teams away and just worked the work, that would be a pretty good starting point. And then obviously, sort of the idea of strategy is the way of how you have an integrative, generative approach to collaborate with people around you. So that's the opportunity. Help your team figure out what it is, stay on it, speak about it with the people around you. And I bet you the biggest beer you can drink that if you do this, it will help you do other things better. And it's something you do anyway. So if you take this idea of just looking at where you're talking about this, where you're speculating around this, and try to gather it to one regular conversation, then that would actually give you immediate benefits. So it becomes a way of understanding the world through what you are doing. That's your test. Are we doing the right thing, or should we change things around? Which is why I have fun calling my little bedroom operation Thinking Twice. Are you sure what you do now is the right thing? So, cheap advice. If you're a leader, start leading with strategy. First of all, find out what it is. I have some fun with this, and if in a room like this, I ask people, what is your strategy? At least half of you would not be able to respond. And half of you would probably start at the North Star and figure out what on earth it was. Very rarely people talk about what is our strategy, what is our contribution to this bigger thing that we are part about. And OKRs are your friend. I've always liked OKRs, and I realized that people don't like them or criticize them. But actually they are a mini form of strategy. Objective, aspiration, key result, prediction of outcomes, action. So if you can find a way to usefully express what you and your team are doing in a few OKRs with this in mind, then that's a pretty good way of communicating with the world. And then there's a billion other dysfunctional ways of using them. If you run a company, some years ago, I presented about these thoughts in a thing we call the Gilpfest. And my suggestion was that anything you could invest in automating your code pipeline was worth investing. And I think right now, today, anything you can invest in automating management is worth every penny you spend on it. Because there's so much energy trapped in us not really knowing what is going on. And I really think it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. I haven't seen anyone bring this technology to market. I know people who are scratching the surface, but if you look at companies like Atlassian, whatever, they are all changing the agentic stuff at the moment. If you run a larger department or a smaller company, get yourself an agile coach, or if you still have one, don't fire him and her or her. And share this with your leaders. People haven't actually seen it, and I think it's pretty simple. I think actually today, looking back, you can say it's the capability of continuous planning that drives this change, and you cannot do it without generative AI. But generative AI cannot do it for you alone. I'm building a community at the moment. We need to change how Agile is working. And the things that we look at are these things. Sort of a little bit of a campaign, don't fire your Agile coaches. And I think actually the places which are scaling back at the moment, they do it for the right reasons, because it probably doesn't work. But it's not because it doesn't work, it's because the way it's applied is the wrong way. My God, I can't say that. Fixing Agile for the future, and then bringing Agile coaches into the new role as a strategy facilitator. We have some meetups. I offer short meetups to talk about this. And then there is some material for leading with strategy that actually helps make people conversant in strategy. It's unbelievable how little senior leaders know about strategy. So you don't actually need to pick up that much to be conversant. What does it mean to be conversant? It means that you can talk about things without being revealed in not really knowing what you talk about. Okay, but we do better than that. It's really useful, and you can find that there. And then if you want to help share the message, I'm practicing all the time. And this is, I think, the best I have done so far. Thank you.